Good afternoon, and welcome to CQ Roll Call's webinar series. I'm Susanna Cagle, the Product Manager of our Advocacy Tools here at CQ Roll Call, and I'm joined today by Joshua Habursky, Senior Manager of Grassroots Advocacy at the American Diabetes Association and Adjunct Professor at West Virginia University. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you.
Josh is also a recent recipient of the 2015 Showalter Grassroots Innovation Network Award. During his time working at the American Motorcyclist Association, he was a recipient. So he's more than a little qualified to talk with us today about grassroots advocacy and the digital world. Before Josh gets started, I want to let all of our viewers know that there's no need to write down all the great resources Josh will mention today as we go throughout this webinar. We will follow up today's WebEx with the presentation you see today, so prepare to see that in your inboxes. Without further ado, Josh.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm very excited for the opportunity to present on this topic and work with CQ Roll Call to discuss pertinent advocacy-related topics through a series of webinars and in-person events. A lot of this presentation is an adaptation of my strategic social media course at West Virginia University and the curriculum as applied to the broader digital world and grassroots advocacy. These are just a few best practices that I've found over the course of a few years. The first being having an information warehouse or a central portal. This can be a government relations section of a website or a advocacy tool platform. At the Motorcyclist Association, we call it an advocacy center, and it was a repository for federal, state, and local legislative and regulatory action. There was no paywall behind this, and our goal was to encourage as much engagement and traffic as possible. It was a free resource to attract potential members as well as people interested in the issue area. The action alerts were featured prominently, and the organizational priorities were also listed. And this is very similar to what we have at the American Diabetes Association as well, with featuring our priorities and organizational goal. I like to think of this informational warehouse as the digital anchor where everything else is connected.
So Josh, you mentioned that this is the central repository. A question for you about whether this is a website or a platform. You can have varying sizes of associations who want to start building or keep curating their information warehouse. Do you have any guidance for us on when to use a website, when to have an advocacy-specific website, or when to use a platform? Kind of how do I know what's the first step?
I think, having a platform and having one person manage that, it's a nice fit for smaller groups and organizations that don't have external vendors or large staff. But, there's multiple options with that. If you do have a large staff, a budget with creative services, you might want to have a larger website and have the Advocacy Center as one component of your government relations website. But, it really is a decision that your marketing communications team as well as your government relations team should make, as well as the executive team.
Absolutely. So whomever has the most access to the content is going to be curating the content is really the person to be making that decision.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Another important tip is email address required. Essentially, list building is one of the most important components of any grassroots program. This is the bedrock for newsletters, subscriptions to email updates, and the ever-important action alerts. Email action alerts are where the vast majority of online actions are going to be taken by an organization's advocates. List building is one of the most important parts of running a successful program, and an email address is an integral start to build up the ladders of engagement. Some of the free or low-cost services out there where you can require an email address is MailMunch, SumoMe, Pippity, and Opt-in, and the latter two being specifically for WordPress sites, which I know a lot of associations and nonprofits are on.
Great, great. So a question for you about list building. I know right now we're talking about the importance of the email address as that key indication of someone's user ID or how you know who your advocates are. However, what are some other fields or maybe metadata that you want to track in your list other than just the name and the email address and maybe a phone number? Is it social handles, other demographic information? What's too much and what's too little?
For sure. The more information that you're able to get from your advocates is great. You can use that later down the line. Obviously, if you have an address, you can do a lot with that and do some locational targeting. You know, if you know that you have so many members within 5 miles of the state capitol, you can build a coalition of people that can go in and have meetings in a moment's notice. But really, it is requiring a certain amount of fields, but not too much. I think that there's some sites out there right now that are requiring too much, getting too personal. You want to get so that you have enough and that you can properly target, but not overburden your advocates or your membership.
Absolutely. So maybe the least abrasive thing you can do is start with name, email address, and expand from there as you go.
Yep. As you do different action alerts, you can add other fields or require information elsewhere.
That's great to know. Very helpful.
Another important thing to consider is communication frequency, how much you're posting, how much you're sending people information. You know, this is a debatable section, but I think the common best practices right now for an advocacy organization or a government relations department would be to post 3 or more tweets a day, 2 at most on Facebook, 1 LinkedIn post. Google Plus, you know, you also can do a little more 3 times. Pinterest, if you have one of those accounts, 5 per day or more. Instagram, 1 per day. And having an active blog schedule of 2 posts per week is definitely something that, you know, any organization should strive for. But obviously there's variability here with staff, your organizational goals, audience, creative assets, budget, and external vendors.
Gotcha. So how important is it to have a social media presence versus directly relating with your advocates via email? Where am I going to get the most traffic, and what do I need to set up first?
Well, I think that, you know, you're going to have your most traffic on your email action alerts, but think of it more as an integrative campaign. When you're sending out an action alert, this should be posted across channels. It should be so that if your advocates don't open the email, they might see it on Facebook, they might see a tweet about it, and making sure that the message is crafted properly for each platform, but going towards that central goal of getting the engagement.
Gotcha. So I know we're going to talk about channel selection here in a minute and which social media platform is going to make the most sense for your organization. Earlier, offline in our conversation, you mentioned some interesting statistics about how many people are taking action through an email versus a social channel versus your website. Could you maybe let our audience know a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, if you look at it, and I've had some variability in different organizations, but, you know, 75–80% seems to be the email traffic, you know, 10% for any of the social media, and then on your website you might get another 10%. You know, that can drop 5 to 10% depending on how you're set up, but I think that has been kind of the standard that I've experienced.
Gotcha, gotcha. So getting those action alerts set up in email is the critical component.
Yes.
Great to know, great to know. All right.
So another important thing to consider is channel selection. You know, if you're an association or corporation, where does your government relations department fit in? At the Motorcyclist Association, we had a separate Grassroots Twitter handle, which had some positive and negatives, a lower number of followers, but a highly segmented audience. We also had a central Facebook page and a central LinkedIn page, although most of the LinkedIn posts were attributed to the Government Relations Department. At the ADA, we have a central social media account, which serves as a great air traffic controller. We in the Grassroots department have a great relationship, and they do great work.
That's wonderful to hear. So it sounds like you could do this a bunch of different ways, depending on if you have a dedicated social media manager or if you're just getting started. For those grassroots managers out there who are very on the ground, probably on their mobile device a lot, Twitter is easy. When it comes to maybe LinkedIn or Facebook or some of those heavier content pieces, are there any maybe free or recommended tools out there to kind of manage all of those channels after you select the ones that make sense for your organization?
Yeah, there's a lot of free or inexpensive resources like Hootsuite out there. If you're doing images, you can edit images through Pixlr. Free images from Pixelbay. ThinkStock is also fairly inexpensive. It's always great to have someone in the creative department that can make some changes and edits to that content so that you really can target your message. But, obviously as someone that gets thrown into a grassroots department, you're going to have to adapt and learn some of these technology pieces that will be, critical in the success of your program.
Gotcha. So maybe talk to me a little bit about how you know what's successful. You've picked these channels, you started creating the content, you've identified the tools, the right people are involved, but if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So, kind of what's the best way to go about doing that?
Yeah, definitely set some benchmarks, set goals, from the beginning and reevaluate and constantly adapt your strategy based on those goals and whether you're achieving them. Have huddles with your team and brainstorm sessions so that you can make sure that you're ensuring that all of the content is the freshest and most up-to-date so that you're getting that engagement. Always look for new products and opportunities, and have, your informal focus groups. Anything that I write, if it's not confidential, goes to my informal focus group of either my mom, my dad, or my sister. So.
Gotcha. I'm sure they probably have a separate inbox for you.
Yeah.
That's exciting to hear. Okay. So one of the things you mentioned there, sometimes with the free tools, is that, setting apart these metrics, getting the right thing in place to measure. A lot of the free tools, I'll just add in, I've had experience just using the metrics that they provide as a great way to get started. They'll usually say, measure your audience engagement, measure these things, and you can kind of tweak it to meet your personal style from there. So that's really great to hear.
Okay, another interesting thing, and I know that we talked in our discussion in preparation for the webinar, that content calendars are a really important topic to keep a grassroots program focused. Legislative and regulatory process can be very unpredictable. You might have no action alert for a week and then have 12 in one day. For large campaigns, this can be a really productive tool to use. Be proactive, have your roles and responsibilities, deliverables, and due dates set out on this content calendar. Obviously, you're going to have to adapt. Something's going to change in the process, but to have something organized and having a specific person out there as taking the lead can be very useful.
Gotcha. So when it comes to organizing this and trying to identify kind of the minimum number of stakeholders, because we all know that the content is always the hardest part, finding the tool is usually the easiest bet, and preparing the content takes much more time. Who would you say kind of needs to fact check or make sure that this whole content calendar is kind of on the right page? Obviously, the grassroots manager might be the main owner of it, but it's going to have a lot of input from other folks. Who should really be the person kind of taking responsibility to make sure that all the things listed in the calendar fit your entire organization's schedule, because there are so many departments?
For sure, and I would say, the grassroots, manager, coordinator, whatnot, plays a very minimal role in the content calendar itself, other than, putting the action alerts, but working with, the department heads of the government relations and that's where the level of conversation for a content calendar will take place, and then the marketing and communications department heads as well. After those discussions take place, then, the grassroots manager would come with those certain deadlines and dates and potential content to use, but really, above is where that air traffic controlling takes place.
Gotcha.
So user-generated content, obviously we can't create everything, especially if you're a one-man shop. Having other participants, whether it's your members or your advocates, submit content to use is great. One of my favorite resources out there is the CQ Connectivity blog, and recently they did a post on the 50 stealable grassroots marketing campaigns, and one of them that really struck out me as a great example of user-generated content was the American Society of Civil Engineers. They had 900 submissions from 50 countries. Their campaign was integrated on Facebook, Twitter, and email, and it was just a photo contest to highlight the work of civil engineers through photographs or bridges. Really having this as a content is a great way to spur engagement, obtain content for later use, and ensure a two-way conversation.
Wonderful. So talk to me a little bit about other ways that you can get this conversation started if a contest isn't quite the right fit. I know there are petition tools out there. You could do a survey. How do you go about sampling your audience about what's going to work the best if you don't have, free T-shirts to give away?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, through a software platform, you have a lot of different tools in your arsenal to employ. Do some beta tests on small segmented groups, see what works. If a petition's driving more traffic, then work with your federal, your state teams to determine, what is the best tactic to use, and, adapt your strategy based on that.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. So when you talk about going around and maybe doing a beta test, is testing what content works something that you seem to find value in for all types of content on that content calendar? I know we've heard mention of A/B testing, where maybe I send two of the same types of emails with maybe a different look and feel or a different template or a different font in each one and see which one I get a better response from. Is that something I should be doing with all my types of content?
I think, a lot of that on social media platforms is self-serving. If you're seeing the likes, the shares, the comments, people are interested, they're engaged, that's your feedback loop there. So it's informal testing, it's looking at that. There's so many social media measuring tools out there that are paid that if your organization has those, you can really delve into the metrics of how long people are looking at certain content and make your decisions based on that.
Excellent, excellent. I know something you mentioned earlier in our conversation offline was how important it is to have a share over maybe a like or a comment, even though all three are great tools. Maybe you want to mention that to our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, a share from my vantage point is very important. That's essentially forwarding an action alert on where multiple people can view it and take action. If you're doing a Facebook post correctly and you have an image that is interactive, that is eye-catching, then it's going to forward along, and then people are going to quickly take action on there.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about interactive content because when you mentioned having an image on there, so maybe talk to us a little bit about how much more is an image worth than just the text.
For sure. On the screen here, you'll see an infographic that my boss, Joe Franco, and the team created at the American Diabetes Association. And it's a perfect example of interactive content and how it's better than just plain text. Infographics, video, audio clips are very much still in vogue. Short form communication remains king. Having something that's simplified, interesting, eye-catching can go a lot. And this is something, at our lobby day will be presented to members of Congress, and we think that that is the appropriate vehicle.
Wonderful. So this infographic is really, it just looks cool. However, question about the audience when it comes to an infographic. So if I want to inform a new audience about what it is that my organization does and getting them involved in an issue versus an already engaged audience who is kind of well aware of what I do, they're a member of the ADA maybe, what are some guidelines and some principles around what to include and not include in my infographic so I make sure that each of those audiences is going to understand the time that I put into this?
For sure. I think that, as the infographic and the amount of information expands, the larger the infographic, I think that's when you have your audience and your advocate database or whoever's viewing this content, they have to be informed if you're going to have a lot of those features in it. Simplified, keep it to one page. If you just want a general audience, if you're going to share it on social media, it should be even more simplified. Eye-catching, it can be one factoid with a cartoon-style graphic. That will have a lot more play than just having text alone.
Gotcha. So a picture is worth more than 1,000 words and definitely more than a tweet.
For sure.
All right.
So another important thing to consider is length and links. In terms of length of different posts and content, that's another thing that can be debatable. I like to go by digital marketers' recommendations. For Facebook, having it limited to 40 characters, Twitter 71 to 100 characters, Google plus 60 characters, domains 8 characters, hashtags 6 characters, email subject lines 28 to 39 characters, and it's also very important to frequently link to larger documents or posts. You can use bit.ly, tinyURL, which not only serves as a link shortener, but will also have some top-level metrics that you can view as well.
Gotcha. So I've used tinyURL a few times in my day. One of the concerns that I think as a professional organization we have is how safe is it to use a company like tinyURL where they have access to something I want to send out to a general audience and I have a login with them, which makes me feel secure, but how do I know that those metrics aren't going to get shared in some sort of industry study without my acknowledgement?
Well, I think it's, anything on the internet that's publicly available, it can be, viewed and it could end up in a study like that. However, as you mentioned, having an account that's formal, that will add some protections, but really, making sure that these are top-level statistics. They're not your down-in-the-weeds data collection through a paid service.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So make sure you have a login, but feel free to take advantage of tools.
Yes. Another one of my, I think, most critical things when it comes to any digital or even offline communication is maintaining your organizational voice. And this is something that goes beyond anything in a grassroots department. It's really organization-wide. It's a common pitfall to lose the organization's voice online. Maintaining an organization's identity and unified online and offline presence is very important. Here you see two very unique online petitions. The one on the left was one that I worked on at the American Motorcyclists Association. It's very aggressive, in your face. It compels people to action. To the right is the American Diabetes Association, which is a live petition, stopdiabetes.com/petition, and my colleague Julia Nash did a lot of hard work on that. It's equally as compelling, but it pulls at the heartstrings for different emotional appeal. And you see the different voice resonate here. The one to the left had nearly 30,000 signatures, and the one to the right, as of today, broke the 25,000 mark.
Congratulations. That's great work. So a question about identifying voice for those of us who have worked at a smaller organization before. I know there was a point in time where I was the marketing department and the project management department and maybe a couple other departments, give or take. If I haven't identified a formal voice yet, what are some things I can do to get started making sure that my voice is the same across these new digital social channels that I'm selecting before we get formal? What are some things to kind of keep myself in check?
Sure. when you get hired, that 2-week period before from your end date to your start date, read everything on your organization. Even if it doesn't apply to grassroots or government relations. In diabetes, read about, the health, the nutrition, everything that's going on, fundraising, events, attend events. Become as immersed in the organization as possible so that you don't have to play catch up and you can focus on the tactics and strategies once you get in there.
Wonderful. So I know I definitely did some reading on our corporate site when I was starting here at CQ Roll Call, and I imagine you did the same. All right, thank you.
So another one of my favorite ones to caution people against is trolls. In government relations and in advocacy, everybody's passionate about policy issues on whether it's one side of the spectrum or the other. There's people out there that are trying to cause an organization to lose that voice or contradict itself. Have a social media and a posting policy, enforce it. Make sure there's nothing profane out there, and don't be afraid to provide factual corrections, but always maintain your organization's authority.
Gotcha. So when it comes to creating this policy, I know we can all be familiar with, our corporate HR policy, what you can do, what you can't do, but social media tends to be a little bit more of a gray area. I have a personal Facebook account, which is probably not quite as professional as my LinkedIn, and, each channel seems to kind of have its own standards. So say my company settles on a social media policy, we have it in place, and it gets broken. Maybe something not purely profane, but something we don't quite agree with gets posted on our Facebook wall, and we need to react. How do we know if we ignore it, if we respond, if we delete it? Are there any general standards that you would recommend as kind of a best practice?
Well, I think that if you can make a factual correction and link to a document that corrects the record and puts your organization's position forward, do that. Obviously, that decision can't be made solely by the grassroots person. Work with your higher-ups and your communications and your social media teams if you have one. But I think that, it sometimes not reacting, if it's so egregious that, it doesn't deserve a response, don't be afraid to not post. But I would say that, when you can, when it's afforded to correct the record, do so.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So another thing is, made for mobile, as well as tablets. Just to share a few statistics, Pew Research Center came up with a report. 64% of American adults own a smartphone, 40% or 42% own a tablet, and 90% own a cell phone. A lot of organizations are moving towards mobile apps, and it's really important that the content is created specifically for that. If you're at your lobby day and you want your advocates to take action on a petition or alert, having those resources available and usable on a mobile and tablet device is great.
Absolutely, and I know one of the key words we hear a lot about that is responsive design. So if you ever hear the phrase responsive, that means it's going to work on any of those mobile devices, be it a phone, be it a tablet, and to keep an eye out for that when you're looking at any tools you want to use.
Then our last, main tip is social listening. I hinted on it before, to have a two-way conversation. All of your content should be conversational, so engage your audience constantly. Have that feedback loop in place. Look at the comments. Respond when you can, and there are some tools out there. Salesforce has a few products in that you can pay as an organization to get more defined metrics. I know CQ Engage has a lot of tools and resources out there as well.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad to hear you mention that you like our tools. And in addition to that, it's also nice to know that, while you're being proactive and you're getting these channels set up, the most important thing you can do is make sure that you have an idea of how people are liking it. Ask people via that channel, or just, people that you're aware of, and say, is this something you would respond to? Is this something that you like? Because there's no better method than just understanding how people feel about a post to make sure that your voice is right, that the content is right, and that it meets people's needs.
For sure. And I know we're running out of time, but I do want to give people some additional resources, and my students in my course know about all of these very well by now. The Pew Research Center does an annual comprehensive study on social media. It's actually required reading for this week's discussion board in my class.
Professor Josh.
The Congressional Management Foundation has a lot of great studies out there. Brad Fitch does a great job in really measuring what's going on with congressional staff and Congress itself. Then I'm always a huge proponent of the CQ Connectivity blog, as well as CQ State Trackers for those people that are inclined to state-level work. Campaigns and Elections magazine, they seem to be on the cusp of anything technology and advertising related to campaigns, as well as some parts of the advocacy space. Adweek is also another good site. And then really most importantly, colleagues and competitors, and that's why I'm very excited to work with CQ on these webinars and have more thought leaders in the industry talking about best practices.
Great. Well, these are great resources. We appreciate the mention, and as we mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, we will send around not only these resources you see here on the screen, but all the other great tools that Josh mentioned throughout the course of the presentation. So thank you, Josh. In addition to our webinar today, we also have provided the ability for our viewers to follow up and ask questions. So Josh can be reached at his Twitter handle, which is @JoshHabursky on Twitter. And if you use the hashtag CQ Advocacy, we'll make sure to respond to your questions in time and also share those on our own connectivity Twitter account so you can follow along with us and learn a little bit more around what Josh has to say in the digital world and ask him some personal questions for your organization. So thank you, Josh, for your time today. We appreciate you having you here, and good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.